You'll find the reading this morning on page 1020 of your Pew Bibles. And as Maggie says, it's taken from Mark 14, verses 12 to 26, page 1020. The Last Supper. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened. And one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me." "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. This is the word of the Lord.
And thank you for that reading. My name is Phil Harrington. I'm the rector here at St Mary's, and it's good to welcome you all to our service, and I hope you enjoy your time with us. Now, this morning, we just got a one-off sermon, as Maggie mentioned at the beginning of the service, and we're going to just be reminding ourselves of why Holy Communion has such a central place in Christianity, and just explore some of the theological questions that have been going around through the pandemic within the Church of England as to whether it is legal under canon law for us to use individual cups to drink wine, or whether we should be returning to the common cup. And normally, when I start a talk like this, I try to find some sort of witty anecdote or illustration to sort of put you all at ease and get you on side a little bit, but I really couldn't think of one that was appropriate for a talk like this. So we're just going to have to get stuck in. So the first thing I wanted to do was just to remind ourselves of why Holy Communion has such an important part in our faith. And as we know, Jesus was crucified. And at the time, that was the most shameful way to die. Jesus died abandoned by his friends. He was rejected by his own people, killed by a colonial power that only used crucifixion for those they considered to be the worst criminals. He died, therefore, a very public and humiliating death. He was stripped and mocked, degraded by those who thought that it was a spectator sport to come and watch people killed on a cross. And the word crux, or cross, was seen as a swear word by the Romans, given that it was so vile. And the first Christians were taunted for this. Why would people follow someone who died such a shameful death? Why do you celebrate the cross when it's a swear word, when it's so degrading? And yet this event is the one thing that Jesus commanded his followers to remember, and the cross became, if you like, the logo of the Christian faith. And we see in those verses, in verses 12 to 17, what Jesus is doing is gathering his disciples, and they are preparing to celebrate the Passover meal. That's what they're doing. And they're remembering that evening of God's final dramatic act in the process of freeing the people of God, Israel, from the slavery and bondage under the Egyptians. They're remembering the night before that great act of deliverance and rescue. And in Exodus chapter 12, verse 14, God commands them to commemorate that great act of rescue throughout all generations, when God liberated the people from slavery under the Egyptians. You're going to reenact that meal for generations to come. And so that's why they've gathered. They're gathering to do that. But here, what Jesus is doing is gathering his disciples for a meal before the supreme and cosmic, the greatest act of deliverance and rescue, that of the deliverance of humanity from the power and consequences of sin and the slavery that we have to that. And Jesus says, I want you to mark this and celebrate this with a meal. And I always find it really interesting that Jesus commands us not to reenact his birth. Not quite sure how you would do that, actually. Not his miracles, not his teaching, not even his resurrection or ascension, which were cosmic things, but his death. Jesus said, remember this. Remember, this is the central reason of why I came. Why I came, and I came to die. And Jesus' death was central to his own understanding of why he had come to earth. That was his understanding of his mission. That's why he came. And that meal has evolved into what we now do in Holy Communion. So that's just a little reminder. Why is it so important? It's important because Jesus commanded us to do it, because we're commemorating the supreme act of deliverance and rescue. Now, why is there debate at the moment about whether we drink wine from a chalice like this or whether we have individual cups? Now, obviously, during the pandemic, in their wisdom, the church leadership decided that we shouldn't take communion, we shouldn't take it in one kind, and the priest in each parish was the one who was meant to take both bread and wine on behalf of the parish. And that was fine for the first few months, but increasingly I felt uncomfortable with it because it created a hierarchy that somehow I am more special than you. And Jesus said, drink this, all of you. Not drink this, you priests, on behalf of your parish. And so it became increasingly uncomfortable for me and for many clergy in the Church of England, because communion is a sacrament of unity. Okay? It's not intended to be an individualized act, but it's a family meal. And St. Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians about one bread can be translated as one loaf. And again, that points to some sacramental unity. We're taking bread from the same loaf. And whilst, for those of you church historians, you'll get excited by this, there's not much evidence of how the early church celebrated communion, actually. By AD 390, John Chrysostom, the then Archbishop of Constantinople, wrote that the Father's desire is that we should drink out of one cup. So somewhere between Jesus' time on earth and AD 390, it had become the assumed practice that Christians would share from one cup. And then in AD 726, Pope Gregory II instructed St. Boniface that it was not fitting that 2 or 3 cups be placed on the altar when the ceremony of the Mass was performed. And throughout the Western Church, over the centuries, the common cup became the standard practice. And in the 1549 Book of Common Prayer, which much of our liturgy is rooted in and founded upon, it was clear that the cup in the singular was the way that it was envisaged to be shared communion, and it wasn't until the relatively in recent times that some denominations have decided to use individual cups. And so currently it's the explicit practice of the Church of England that we should be using one cup. And if you were wondering, well, when on earth did all of this become enshrined in legal law? And if you're sitting there thinking, I wonder whether it was around 1547, you would be right, and you would be absolutely amazing. The Sacrament Act of 1547. If that wasn't on the tip of your tongues, then I need to be a bit better at teaching you about church history. And so what is clear from biblical witness, as far as we have it in terms of Jesus' teachings, as I said, we don't have the early church habits until AD 390. So from the biblical witness, the Book of Common Prayer, church history and canon law, is that the gold standard in how we as Anglicans take communion is that we should have one loaf and not wafers, incidentally. So at some point we will return to one loaf and a cup for the sharing of the wine. So, but some people are saying within the Church of England, well, maybe we should stop doing that now. Now's the time to change that practice. Is that something that we should consider? So given this context, where are we at the moment? So it's not an option for us to abandon taking communion because it's a command. We have to take bread and wine. Jesus said that this is something that we should remember. It's not an option to keep it going in one kind, as we have been doing over the last couple of years until the last couple of weeks. Intinction, when you dip your wafer or your bread in the cup, is not really envisaged in scriptures either. So what can we do? Now, some of you have, and I have to say I'm reasonably sympathetic to you to this point, have expressed the opinion that purely out of personal choice, you prefer not to return to the common cup, because the concept of looking in a chalice and seeing what's in there can sometimes be off-putting. And I would have a degree of sympathy with you. At times, towards the end, when I have to sort of consume what's left, I look in it and I see there's a breadcrumbs, and I think, oh my word, what? You know, part of me for a nanosecond says, oh Lord, keep me safe, and then I consume the rest. So there is a degree of which that I'm sympathetic to people's, like, do we really have to return to the common cup? And some of you have also said, well, is it safe to? And when I'm talking to the wardens about this, I was like, well, it really depends on what your definition of safe is. The alcohol that we use is fortified wine, so the alcohol content is still quite high, and that will kill some of the germs. The high quality of silver, and I don't know how this works, but the way the silver reacts with the air also has some kind of purification method in it. And the purificator, that's the tissue, but it sounds better, the purificator. When we obviously wipe it, then you are removing most of the germs, but evidently not all. But I think centuries of practice points to the fact that overall, sharing the common cup is safe to use. And I've been thinking, well, I was confirmed when I was 12, and so I've been taking communion since then, 34 years ago. Sorry, my maths was... and I don't think I've become unwell having taken communion at church. I don't think there's any verifiable evidence in my life that says I took wine and I therefore became sick. And so I think it's important for us to remember that generations of Christians before have probably had similar sentiments to this, but have always returned to this practice. And I think it would be quite something if we were the generation who decided we don't want to do that anymore. Like, we stand on their shoulders. And although I get why there is hesitancy, particularly 2 years is a long period of time to get out of the habit of this, the concept of returning to that might be hard for some of us to get our heads round. So what are we doing? So, some of you may be aware that we have a Tuesday morning Sed Communion. It's at 11 o'clock, and everybody is welcome to come. We've been doing that for people who are particularly vulnerable, but I think during the summer months, as many of you who are around are welcome to join us. And we use individual cups for that service. There are lots of people who have been sort of clinically vulnerable during the pandemic, and so we do that. And so that's always going to be on offer. That's something that's grown out of the pandemic that I like, and we'll continue that on. So there's going to be a midweek service there. So on Sunday services, in the end, the bishops will want us to return to the common cup and one loaf, so no wafers. And I think there is likely to be the pastoral provision for a few individual cups to be offered to those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. In the same way that we try to offer, if people are gluten intolerant, we try and offer people an option so they can still take bread. There'll probably be no change to canon law, because that takes years for the Church of England to figure that out, but there'll probably be a pastoral accommodation from the bishops to say, for some of you, you can use individual cups. Now, this is a point. I don't want everybody writing to me and suddenly saying, I'm clinically vulnerable, because I won't believe all of you. And so there'll probably be, and it will be difficult, right? There'll probably be a both and. This is the Anglican Church. They'll probably say, we would want you to use one loaf, one cup, and a few individual cups for those of you who are really vulnerable. But you're not ready for that. And so for a season, we do have dispensation from Bishop Andrew. And not all bishops have done this. My clergy colleagues in Southwark, their bishop have said, no, it's not canonical, it's common cup or nothing. Okay, Bishop Andrew tried to take a bit more of a softer approach to this, but at some point he'll probably say, right guys, you need to now return to the common cup. And so for a season, despite it being terrible theology, we're going to continue using wafers, and we will have individual cups. But I want to sow in your minds and prepare you that there will come a time where we will need to stop doing that. And so the risk is I'm setting a precedent that you really enjoy and get used to, and then you don't want to go back to doing a common cup. So I just need you to get your heads around that at some point that is coming. And to a degree, I've missed using the altar rail. The sort of formality of that is, I think that's something that's quite beautiful. I've missed being able to hide my displeasure at some of you dipping the bread in and leaving your crumbs in and me pretending that's still okay. I've missed the risk, the high-risk states of thinking, well, does this person want to take the cup from me, or do they want to hold it, and I've got to try and pour it, and is it going to go down their front? And, I like that little jeopardy of how we do the common cup. And then, obviously, the joy of consuming everything that's left at the end. And so that will come back, but I know that you're not ready for it. Okay, so we just need to get our head around that. But generations have done it before during plagues and pestilence, and even during the most recent time was during swine flu, I think. And people have managed to come back to it. But it will just take time, and I understand that. But as I end, if we do think about what this is all about, and why is it central to the Christian faith? When Jesus says, this is my body, he says, take, eat, this is my body. And he says, drink this, all of you, this is my blood. And as I was reminding people at Easter, there is the element of that this is being ingested, and the gospel needs to be taken down into us, deep within us. That good news of what Christ has done for us. It needs to be inwardly digested, taken deep into ourselves, and the degree to which that does go deep and transform our hearts is the degree to which we experience the life that Jesus offers and promised in the New Testament. And it is a really shameful way to die, the way Jesus died, that crucifixion. And yet, St. Paul could say we can glory in the cross, you and I. And that is because when we recognize that God voluntarily, so in Jesus Christ, God voluntarily chose to take on the shame of the cross for each and every one of us here, that needs to go deep in your heart and tell you how valuable you are in God's sight. That you are precious enough, so valuable to God that he would endure that for you. Each and every one of you here are more precious than you can get your heads around. And some of you will be thinking, yeah, but you don't know the stuff inside me. Well, God does. And your worth is not based upon your behavior. It's on the fact that you are, and I am, the object of his love. You are loved because God has loved you. And we are reminded of that every time we take communion. I am so precious that God did this for me. And that's not like a guilt thing. That's a wow. I'm so precious that God did this for me. The cross is central because it shows how God has dealt with the problem of our human sin. It is where Satan is defeated. It shows us the lengths that God has gone to rescue us. And it reminds us of how precious you are in God's sight. Amen.